Good afternoon, my name is Michael Mazzotta and today we'll be discussing the First Opium War. In this presentation we'll be looking at the war itself, Xi Jinping's 1997 film titled The Opium War, as well as the critical writings of P.E. Sequet. The war itself was a direct confrontation that occurred between the British Empire and the Qing dynasty. The conflict, as the name suggests, was directly caused by the British trade of opium in China. The British Empire had discovered the vast profits of shipping opium from British-controlled Bengal, which is in India, to Chinese-controlled Canton. The distribution of vast amounts of opium in China, however, had caused detrimental social and economic disruption within China itself. The Qing dynasty had come to the realization that the highly addictive nature of opium was destroying the internal fabric of the Celestial Empire. Various attempts were made by the Qing dynasty to halt its distribution prior to 1839, however none were successful. Placing blame on the British, the Qing dynasty had appointed Imperial Commissioner Li Jinzhu to oversee the confiscating and destruction of British-owned stockpiles of opium in 1839. This aggressive move by the Chinese had allowed tensions between the British Empire and the Qing dynasty to approach a tipping point, resulting in a full frontal conflict between the two empires. The conflict would ultimately see, over the course of 4 years, the British inflict a large series of land and naval defeats for the Qing dynasty. From the destruction of the Chinese blockade at the Pearl River estuary to the capture of Nanking in 1842, the British would ultimately be victorious. The end of the war will be marked by the Treaty of Nanking, which consisted of Hong Kong ceding away from China and coming under British rule. It also included paying an indemnity of $21 million, as well as the opening of 5 treaty ports that would allow the British to trade within China on a significantly increased level. The 1997 Chinese film titled The Opium War is a historical epic directed by Xi Jinping. The motive of the film is to illustrate the First Opium War, mainly through the eyes of the Chinese. The intended audience of the film is mainly to appeal to a Chinese audience, as well as possessing a second objective to deliver China's past narrative on an international level. The film in itself sets out a goal to parlay the Opium War conflict through the historical characters of Imperial Commissioner Lin Zhangzhou and naval diplomat Charles Elliot. The contextual timing of the film critically coincides with the Hong Kong handover of 1997. This is evidence of the film possessing a political agenda, thus reinforcing China's attempt to construct a victimization narrative in contemporary China. The ending of the film itself is key to understanding this notion, where in the ending of Xi Jinping's film, it concludes with the written text of the Treaty of Nanking, stamped by the Imperial Red Seal, which is then accompanied by a haunting foreshadowing music. This ending is also accompanied by an inscription, which portrays China's resistance as heroic, however also fateful. This dramatic, audacious conclusion reinforces China's ideological attempt to close the book alongside the 1997 handover of Hong Kong on China's colonial past. P.E. Sequet, in his reading titled Notions of Addiction in the Time of the First Opium War, reveals a critical argumentative stance when considering the ethics of the Opium War itself. Sequet is highly critical of the British, as he believes they are heavily to blame for the conflict that arose in 1839. The reading exposes the notion that the British possessed full awareness when considering the social and economic dangers of opium. Sequet claims that the British had knowingly poisoned China internally with opium in return for a vast profit margin. The British monopolizing opium trade was heavily criticized by illustrating an unethical British motive. The Chinese response to the British distribution of opium can now, thanks to Sequet, be sympathized through a critical assessment of Britain's ambition. This idea assists in constructing a more enhanced understanding of the Qing dynasty's staunch resistance of British imperialism. The reading denounces the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, as it determines the treaty to be the first step of China's colonialization by foreign powers. Sequet comes to this conclusion by examining the ceding of Hong Kong, as Hong Kong would ultimately be key in gifting the British Empire a crucial foothold in China for the next 155 years. The Chinese reaction to the dangerous, addictive nature of the drug can now be sympathized with and better understood. This is increasingly evident, especially when reviewing the 1997 film. While the war itself was started by the Qing dynasty, it is clear to see through the writings of Sequet in his reading that the Qing dynasty had been forced into provocation by the greed and colonial ambition of the British Empire. Thank you for listening.